either in the National Enquirer or the Star or some other equally reputable magazine of the same high journalistic quality and credibility. The headline referred to an imprint of the hand of Jesus that had been found recently in a cave near Jerusalem, and that the mere touching of this imprint was producing some interesting and miraculous results. Having one of those inquiring minds that wants to know, I began to glance at the story inside, only to discover that the authenticity of this handprint had been determined by a host of experts, and that along with numerous healings and cures already wrought among the deserving, one apparently unworthy investigator had received a high voltage electric shock from touching it. Amazing. Awesome. To think that a 2,000-year-old handprint of Jesus on the wall of a cave could have such healing and destructive powers in our own day. Just like in the movie, maybe you remember, The Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the opened Ark of the Covenant could even produce a Nazi meltdown. When I read the section of Mark from which today's gospel reading is taken, there is much that could have provided headlines for something like the Enquirer in first century Palestine. From today's reading, Rabbi from Nazareth calmed storm at sea by speaking a word, shipwreck averted. Or from the incidents that follow this event in just the next chapter, exorcist puts demons into a herd of pigs. Pigs jump to their deaths in the sea. Or woman healed of 12-year-old hemorrhage by touching clothes of miracle worker. Or 12-year-old girl raised from death by Aramaic-speaking wonder worker. Today and then, there is a strange human fascination with such miraculous, awe-inspiring events. And in all of these events recorded by Mark, note the responses on the part of both the crowds who witnessed them and of Jesus' disciples themselves. In today's reading, we're told, the disciples were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him?" Or, in response to these other awesome events, we hear it repeated, everyone was amazed, or they were overcome with amazement, or they were astounded. That's as far as it goes, however. None of these responses are adequate, and Jesus simply refuses an acknowledgement of his identity and purpose based on these miraculous, awe-inspiring, wonder-working powers. Listen to what he says to the disciples. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? And at the end of all these great deeds he performs, in the next chapter, it's Jesus himself at the beginning of chapter 6 who expresses amazement at the people in his hometown synagogue. Mark tells us they may have been astounded at his teaching, but this time it's Jesus who is amazed at their unbelief. Indeed, in the Gospel of Mark, the only human being who ever gets it right, the only one who's ever allowed to confess Jesus' true identity as the Messiah, as the Son of God without consequence, is the centurion at the cross, who, when Jesus finally breathes his last, says, "Truly, this was God's Son." Not in deeds of power and wonder, not even in calming the sea, raising the dead, only at the cross, only in weakness, suffering, and death is Jesus truly acknowledged for who and what he is. You see, real miracles don't make headlines. Real miracles don't sell papers. And the real miracle is faith and trust in God, not because of, but often in spite of what happens in life. A real miracle is the faith of Job, who in spite of his sufferings, in spite of losing everything he held dear, persevered and trusted in the God who laid the foundations of the earth and set the stars in their place and determined the boundaries of the sea. A real miracle is the faith of Saints Peter and Paul, whose witness we celebrate next Saturday. Of Peter, who confessed Jesus to be the Christ, the Son of the living God, and was himself ultimately crucified for that. Or St. Paul, who in spite of afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, and eventually losing his head, kept proclaiming nothing other than the real power of God, known in purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, and truthful speech, the very weapons of God's own righteousness. A real miracle is the faith of Jesus himself, who in spite of the cross, who in spite of experiencing even God's own apparent forsakenness, trusted that God would be victorious even unto death. A real miracle is the faith of the early Christian community, which in spite of official persecution, violence, and death, changed the world through its witness and its life. Such real miracles of faith continue today. Paul tells us, we urge you not to accept the grace of God in vain. That is, don't cheapen God's grace. Don't cheapen what God has done since the foundations of the earth. Don't cheapen what God has done in the dying and rising of Jesus Christ by turning it into something other than it is, or by looking for something else. Faith is not about the unexplainable, the bizarre, the unnatural, or the absurd. Christian faith is not the religious equivalent to the psychic hotline, UFOs, fortune tellers, carnival sideshows, or the paranormal. Christian faith is not about the search for angels, celestial visitors who predict cataclysmic events, or about powerful fossils which produce miraculous results. Christian faith is about life, down-to-earth life, lived in trusting relationship with God and others. Faith is about life here and now, about perseverance and great endurance in union with the crucified Christ, in whom we have nothing and yet possess everything of ultimate value. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.